welcome back to Learning New Testament Greek, and today we're going to go over the basics of nouns. Now, what is a noun? A noun's a word that represents a person, place, thing, or idea. You could have a proper noun like George or Susan, or you can have just a regular noun like word marker. Marker represents this thing right here. It's the word that represents this thing. It's a noun. Alright, but we want to talk specifically about Greek nouns. Well, there's several elements of Greek nouns that we need to discuss. First of all, nouns have gender. I was about to say what we call gender, but it is gender. So nouns have gender. And nouns can be one of three genders. They could be a masculine noun. It could be a feminine noun. Or it can be a neuter noun. Neuter noun. Now, this doesn't mean that a word that's masculine has to be a male thing, or a word that's feminine has to be a female thing. It's just that the word has this gender characteristic. For example, if you were to go down to the dock and you were to look at a boat, or a ship, or something of that nature, and a pirate was to come up to you and say, "Our she be a fine vessel," well, he's referring to the ship as a she. It's not because the ship is female, but the word is oftentimes referred to as feminine. Sort of like the same thing in Greek. You'll get the hang of it a little better. It'll be a little easier to understand once we're actually working with words. Forgive me. But just know that a word can be, or a noun, be one of three genders: masculine, feminine, or neuter. Now, verbs. I keep saying verbs. Nouns. Nouns also have number. Remember number? Recall verbs have number. But what are the possibilities of number for a verb? A verb can be singular or plural. The same with nouns. A noun can either be singular or plural. When I ask for the number of a noun, I don't really want to know how to contact it by telephone, but I want to know whether it's plural or singular. Those are the only valid answers for when I ask what is the number of this noun. It's either going to be singular or plural. Got that? Very good. Alright. Now recall that verbs are grouped together in what we call conjugations. And remember, a conjugation was a grouping of verbs based on how they form their endings. There are two basic conjugations in Koine Greek. Well, nouns have a similar grouping, except we call these declensions. There's a nice clean spot here. Declensions. A declension is a grouping of nouns that form endings similarly, that have similar endings. The declensions follow basically the same rules for each declension. There are three declensions. We'll be talking about the first two declensions here very soon. The third declension we're going to wait for a while because it has some special things about it that'll come in handy and you'll understand a little later. So it's actually easier to learn when I group with other things. We're not going to worry about third declension nouns quite yet, but we're going to focus on first and second declension nouns. Now, let's see. We talked about gender and number. We learned what a declension is. Declining. If I was to ask you to decline a noun, I'm not saying, oh, no, I couldn't have any more. No, not that type of declining. But declining a noun is when you run it through its declension. That is, you take the noun and you put it in its various forms. Just like you would conjugate a verb, you decline a noun. Understand? Very good. Now, for the most challenging part of nouns, or the basics of nouns, is cases. Nouns have case. In English, we have case, except we don't use it an awful lot. We have a subjective case. No, hold on, that's a mood. No, it is. Subject. A case of the subject, subjective. We also have an objective case. an evocative case. The difference between using a subjective case and an objective case is subjects go in the subjective case and objects in the objective case. That's why a civilized person would say, I, Tarzan, instead of me, Tarzan, because I is the subjective and not objective. You'll understand here a little bit. Well, in English we have about 3 cases. In Greek, we have either 5 or 8 cases. 5 or 8. Now you're saying, hold up, how can you have 5 or 8? Isn't it one or the other? Well, that's a debate that's been raging among grammarians, Greek grammarians specifically, for quite some time, whether there are 5 or 8 cases. That's because they group the cases differently. 5 casers, they group by form. 8 casers by function. I'm going to be teaching the 8 case method. Well, not just because it's the way I was taught, but I believe it's easier to transition to an 8 to a 5 than it is from a 5 to the 8. You're going to learn the same things, we're just going to call them slightly different different terms. But it's easier to go from 8 cases to 5 than 5 to 8. So I'm going to go with the 8, and personally I like the 8 better. Different reasons for that, but we'll talk about that one day maybe. Alright, the 8 cases. They are, let me mark out some real estate here. The first case is the nominative case. The nominative case. The nominative is the case of designation. Designation, or naming. Oh, I ran off the page there. There's a G there, trust me. Alright, the nominative is the case of designation. Things like subjects are most likely, or most usually, going to be in the nominative case. Subjects, predicates, predicate nominatives, predicate adjectives, things like that are going to be in the nominative case. They're usually naming or designating something. The next case is the genitive case. The genitive case can be a little tricky, but the genitive case is the case of description. Description. It's a word used to describe another word. We don't have a genitive case in English, so what we're going to use are what one of my professors called helper prepositions. They're words that sort of take these nouns and help us put them in a way we can understand. The helper preposition for the genitive is of. Of. Genitives describe, they can tell maybe possession or some sort of attribute of something. Actually, I believe there are like 27-ish different ways a genitive can be used. Don't worry about it. We'll get there at time. But genitive description of the genealogies in the New Testament. I recall reading, and David was the son of Jesse, who was the son of Obed, who was the son of the son of. That's a genitive construction. Those are used genitively. Genitive cases there, because it's describing who these people are and their relationship to others. But don't worry, we'll get there. It'll be much more clear once we start actually using real words in real situations. Alright, next up is ablative. Ablative. It is not ablative, it's ablative. An ablative is the case of separation. Separation, and its helper preposition is from. The nominative doesn't have a helper preposition because we understand the nominative. It's similar to our subjective case in English. The ablative is the case of separation. It'll be often used with prepositions that are from, like from this, from that. It could also be used to show contrast, but the idea is that there's some sort of separation. When you use the genitive, or the ablative case, there's some sort of separation. And from is the helper preposition to help us understand it. Next up, we have the dative case. Dative is the case of reception. The dative, when a dative case is used, something is or it's receiving something from it. Oftentimes it'll be receiving an action or something done to or for. Many times it'll be used much like our English indirect object. The dative case is a little different. It's not exactly an indirect object, but don't worry, we'll get there eventually. And its helper preposition is to. I believe Dana and Manti, and their manual grammar of Greek, say that the dative often involves a person of some sort. So instead of a thing being acted upon, a person is acted to or for. It gets just a little hairy, but once we get into some examples, you'll understand it a little better, I hope. Locative. Locative is our next case, and it is the case of location. And its helper prepositions are in or at. If something's in the locative case, it's telling you its location. Paul was in Jerusalem. Jerusalem there would be in a locative case because it's helping to tell about the location of Paul. So it's locative, and not just spatial, it can also be temporal. It could be a location and time. We'll probably look at a few examples of those. I don't have one right off the top of my head, but I know they are used. So you have nominative, genitive, ablative, dative, and locative. Now, the instrumental case. Instrumental. It is the case of means. If something's in the instrumental case, it's telling you how something is done or by what means. This is the helper preposition are going to be with or by. And trust me, there's a Y there, I just misjudged my space. With or by, those are helper prepositions. Here. There we go. Now you can see it. I wrote the list with a marker. Marker here would be in the instrumental because it's the means by which I wrote the list. And so this would be the means. A person could also be a means, but then we call them an agent. Alright. So you have nominative, genitive, ablative, dative, locative, instrumental. Next up, the accusative case. The accusative case is the case of limitation. It has no helper preposition because we can understand the accusative case. It's much like our objective case. It limits the action to a point. Most direct objects are going to be accusative. Not all of them, but most are going to be accusative. John hit the ball. Well, the ball would be accusative because in acting as a direct object, and it limits the action of John hit. You could say John hit. Well, what did John hit? Well, it's grammatically unlimited. He could have hit anything. But when I say John hit the ball, I put a limitation on his action. So I limit it to his hitting to the ball. So the accusative case, you're going to see these, probably the nominative and accusative are going to be your most common, followed by the genitive, I believe, is roughly how that falls out. I have charts and graphs somewhere, but I didn't think to look at them first. So, accusative case, and no helper preposition because we can understand the accusative case. Alright, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now for the 8th, the vocative case. The vocative case is the case of address. And it's the same as our English vocative. We'll use it to directly address someone, or I guess you could directly address something, but typically it's someone. John, come here. John is in the vocative case because it's direct address, and it doesn't have a helper preposition because, well, we don't need it because in English, we can understand what a vocative does. Alright, so that's the basics of nouns. Let's go over one more time. A noun has gender. It can be masculine, feminine, or neuter. It has number. It can be singular or plural. There are 8 cases, or 5 if you want to divide it up that way. The nominative, which is the case of designation. The genitive, which is the case of description. The ablative, which is the case of separation. The dative is the case of reception. The locative is the case of location. The instrumental is the case of means. The accusative is the case of limitation. And the vocative is the case of address. Now, don't worry if you don't quite understand everything we went over today. It's going to make more sense. I just wanted to introduce you to these terms and ideas so I don't have to take the time to deeply describe them later, so you'll have an understanding. And next time, we're actually going to be talking about real nouns, and hopefully some of this stuff will make a little more sense. Alright, until then, have a good day.